Hey, it's Carl with a K. Let's talk about Hollywood. Hi, everybody. Welcome to episode 28 of Let's Talk About Hollywood. I'm your host, Carl Gibson. Hi, I hope everyone's doing well. Want to check in with you all and say thank you for being here. If you're new to the show, this is Let's Talk About Hollywood. It's an audio memoir starting with my career in 2001. That's in season 1. We're now in 2002, which is season 2, episode 28, as I said. So let's get to it. I will tell you, first of all, I launched a GoFundMe campaign this week. It's to fund the podcast and my industry reset, as I've been honest with you all. That's what I'm doing. I moved from Los Angeles to the Tampa Bay area in Florida, and it's a $2,000 goal, and the link to the GoFundMe is in the show notes. So if you're listening to this episode, or if you're on YouTube, if you just go to the show notes, which is the description, the metadata about what the episode is about, you'll see the link there, as well as an optional donation link too. So you don't have to do both, just letting you know that it'll be there. So if you're listening to this episode, it is, what's the word I'm looking for? I guess not time sensitive, but if you're listening to this and it's not February 2026, then odds are I'll have ended the campaign in a week or two. But for now, it's there. So as of February 19th, 2026, it's there. So thank you. And to the people who contributed, I want to thank them right now. My sister Ellie. And by the way, it's my sister Ellie's birthday coming up. So across 19 countries, listeners, I love her so much. Please wish her a happy birthday and terrific vibes. She's been such a huge supporter, not only of me, but of this podcast before it even started. And I couldn't have done this without her. And as well, my mom, my other donors were family and friends: Helga, our niece, Jenny Lynn, Stuart, Shay, and my cousin in Iceland, Guðbjartur. Guðbjartur. Thank you very much, all of you. And thank you to everyone in the country, here in America and around the world, who listened and are still listening. Last week, top 10. And there were just 10, so I'm not leaving any countries out. The listeners last week, thank you to my listeners in the U.S., Spain, France, UK, Finland, Iceland, Singapore, Czech Republic, and India. Thank you for listening. And there was a spike this week earlier, I think 32 downloads in one day, which was pretty amazing. I was like, wow. So I don't know who the listeners were, but if you joined or downloaded and you're new to the show, or you're now part of the community, thank you so much. And again, with my GoFundMe, this podcast will always be free. So I want to tell you that. So thank you. And let's see, if you listened to last week's episode, my mom did, and and she liked it. And that was an episode about Bubbles, but in the recap, I was talking about step parents. And I was talking about relationships. And so my mom liked the episode, but she wanted me to say that one of my stepmothers was really nice. And that stepmother is Betty Jo. Now, that's her real name. Betty Jo. Betty Jo, she was always very nice. She had a very strong personality, and which was likable and is likable. And she had sometimes like really long braids, like these, like in the 70s, that were just gorgeous. And she always had, nice perfume and lotions, and always really cool with me and my younger brother, Daniel. So, how you doing in school, baby? You paying attention? In the kitchen. Really nice. Would let us have Twinkies, which we were not allowed to have at my house. So anyway, besides, it's not just a foodie memory, she actually was very nice. So Betty Jo was a great stepmother, for the record. I stand by what I said. And what else? Oh, I have to say, I had mentioned about if you're in a bad relationship, first of all, stay safe. And then, I was saying, to remember that you are the person who is bringing what you think you'll miss to that relationship, because sometimes you're in a bad relationship and you're like, oh, but there are times that it's good. But if those good times usually are because of you. You're the joy, you're the happiness. And so my mom listened to that and she said, Carl, you need to tell your listeners, if they're in a bad relationship, get out of it. So that's what my mom says. And, I don't disagree. I just didn't want to be, telling listeners like, hey, get out of your bad relationship, because I know it takes time. But my mom is like, look, cut to the chase, tell them to get out. So my mom loves you. And she says, don't be in a bad relationship if you are in one. And also, sadly, I mentioned that one of my younger brothers passed away. That younger brother is not my brother Daniel. I have brothers, plural. So my younger brother who passed away is Greg. And God rest his soul. I love him. He is with my father and with his mother in heaven. And he was a man of God, and he supported me, and I love him. So for family who's listening, it's Greg that I was referring to, and I just want to honor him with that. So we're going to get into 2002. We're going back to the journals. And this is summer of 2002. And this episode really deals with one of my first A-list parties that I was invited to and covered. And this was for Black Hollywood. So I think what I'm going to name this episode, because I'm not giving dates necessarily for some of these parties, just because there were so many of them. And so what I'll do is I'll just say this is an undated party, but it did happen in 2002. And it was my first Black Hollywood event. And yeah, this took place in 2002. This is a two-parter, and that's what it's about. So let's get into it. And this episode is called The Hustle and the Hell. Summer 2002. I'm reminded of how lucky I am that Stone has kept it together and hasn't lost it all these times during stress and defense. I give him props all the time. That's why we have mental strategy talks, because Stone has been holding down the home front and I'm working the media funk. I told Stone that in 2 years, when I have to leave the Hollywood reporter nest, I'll be the one who's out of work while he works every day. After this, I'll have to make it as an actor. No non-media jobs if I want to stay in the game. So the situation will be reversed. Stone is hot, and he is holding it down. Things will change for the better for him. I've sent out 40 resumes on his behalf. It's dead out there in the temp world and the classifieds. This year was my first A-list party invite, period, and from Black Hollywood. I appreciated the invite because I do push, like anyone does with editors in the journalism world, for news stories that are current that wouldn't have necessarily gotten through if I didn't. The company that hosted the party and whose manager invited me is a famous comedian and sitcom star considered by all accounts to be a warm and affable man by the public. We'll call him Augustus Meep. There's a dress code that I could only follow somewhat since I had to go to the venue straight from the newsroom. I put my outfit in the cleaners in the plaza on Highland Avenue in Wilshire, and I took Nigel from Hawthorne as my +1. The party event was on the west side. Despite public perception, I'd heard Augustus could be a pill at times, but I was sure he would have no issues with me. I wanted to maximize editorial reach with Black Hollywood, and I hoped that it would be fun. I had a directory and a list based on my acting work, research, and the people I talked to in the newsroom every day. The event was a lot of fun, and I was glad I enjoyed myself as much as I did. The adrenaline rush was unforgettable, and I didn't go to bed until 2 a.m. after. The crowd was a mix of R&B, gospel, and hip-hop. The venue was very utilitarian and looked like a huge hangar. There were at least 13 valets who didn't have a lot to do since most of the guests and celebrities were parking on the side streets. There was a mobile banner of Augustus, smiling like a cheese ball. It would take some balls to take it all over town, and I hope Augustus doesn't. Nigel and I entered and said hello to the 8 or 9, 20-ish women in various versions of summer sundresses. They were sweet and seemed to be a team of assistants who were working as greeters. I was glad to see that a minority of the guests hadn't followed the dress code like me. Nigel had, and he was good to go. I had on a brawny-chested shirt, but my pants and black vest veered from the code. I met Augustus's talent and PR director, Janet, and she was very together. I heard one guest say, "Janet, weren't you just working at Paramount?" "Girl, that's been so long, don't remind me," Janet replied. I introduced myself to her, and she seemed happy that I'd come and was very nice. The Hollywood Reporter likes Augustus. All the mainstream power men like him, and his A-list peers. They all get play. Augustus looks like he kicked his last successful hit to the curb after it made him a household name, but I think he truly had valid issues with the studio because they did pigeonhole him and ghettoize him, even after ratings and audience reception put them all in the money. Janet said hi to Nigel and told us to head to the VIP room if we wanted. She said, "Augustus should be here in half an hour, and I'll try to get you in to see him. Have a great time." Nigel and I arrived a half hour after the party started. Nigel wanted to arrive on time until I told him that promptness isn't the key with industry parties. You don't need to be on time. We didn't need to arrive on time and grimace while caterers set up glasses and cups. The main party room was a huge room with bars, glass offices for TV interviews, a separate room equally huge with a dance floor, booths, and tables. Outside was a sweeping view of the Hollywood Hills and Beverly Hills. It was overcast and misty, which eased and relaxed my mind. There were at least 4 full-service bars. I'd had an 11-hour day, so I had a lemony citron on the rocks and just zoned out for a moment. It was a nice crowd, and I just wanted to get my bearings and have a drink in the open air. The first person I met was LAPD Police Chief Bernard Parks, sitting with his elegant wife, Bobby. I introduced myself and my outlet, The Hollywood Reporter, and he smiled. He was very nice to talk to. I kept it short and sweet, and he was nice to Nigel as well. Servers came by, and one offered me a crab mango salad on cucumber slices. I tried it, and Nigel saw me struggle, and as a friend he said, "Carl, just chew it and don't trip. Eat it, Carl." There was pesto chicken with avocado sauce on slivers of toast, topped with a tomato, and also very green. Nigel took one, not even knowing what it was, and inhaled it. "Nigel, you'll just eat anything," I said, and laughed because it sounded snarky, but it's true. At the Grammy party I took him to this year, there were decadent appetizers that looked like alien matter. It could have been ostrich crotch and a wonton, and Nigel would eat it, or at least try it. Back to Augustus's party, another server came toward us and offered salmon tartare and sauce with caviar on top of kettle-fried barbecue chips. Nigel tried that too, then blurted, "I've never tried caviar before." "You're right, Carl. My ass will eat anything." And we laughed again. About 3 feet away stopped 2 members of Earth, Wind, and Fire. Verdine White, their bassist, for their entire career, and another longtime member who looks very similar to lead singer Maurice White, who I'll call Bo. We were both quietly, for the moment, stunned to be in their presence. Verdine, lanky and gregarious, and his mellow band member Bo. Nigel told me later about Bo. I'd have him today. "Despite his wife being there," I said, to which Nigel replied, "You think I'm playing?" We introduced ourselves to Verdine, Bo, and Bo's wife, a beautiful lady with long curly hair and the sweetest smile. Nigel has everything Earth, Wind, and Fire ever made, and my mom raised me on them. Who doesn't like Earth, Wind, and Fire? I made sure to shake all of their hands. I told them I got ass whoopings to their music. They were such a constant in our house. I told them how much class they had that never has gone away. Verdine and Bo listened earnestly and nodded their head and were very gracious. Nigel told them, I have all your product. I even got your box set. Lover's Holiday was not included, and I was mad. That song is one of my favorites, and it wasn't on there. Verdine and Bo were genuinely unaware of that fact and looked at each other. Verdine said, Did you know that? And Bo said, I didn't know that either. Nigel said, I've been listening to y'all since I was 5 years old. I cringed a little because Nigel is 36, and I know older acts don't always like to be dated so far back. Verdine and Bo took it as genuinely sincere since Nigel was so effusive and hyper that he was endearing and no harm was meant. We parted company, and when I turned my back from the crowd guests, I just smiled to the sky. That was awesome. I swear. It was just last year I was temping at UCLA, and I bought a Billboard magazine commemorating Earth, Wind, and Fire's 30 years in the business. I remember eating a tuna sub from Togo's and wishing I could meet them one day, and here it was. They're all so together, handsome, and their clothes were so ethnocentric and fierce for decades. Here I had met them, Carl Gibson from Washington, D.C., and then Maryland. I missed my sister Ellie and my mother back on the southeast coast and wished they were there too. Nigel told me, to my shock, that he'd spent $120 on his outfit. He said, It was worth every penny. If I don't meet anyone else tonight, this was worth it, Carl. My brother is going to be so jealous. We were beaming like kids. It was hot. It's moments like this that make all the hustle and hell of LA worth it, and it transcends your expectations. That's the drug, I guess, being in the presence of talented people and communicating to those who influenced your pop culture tastes. It was amazing. Okay, everybody, that's part one. Part two of the party is coming next week, including when I meet Augustus Meep. And Meep is hilarious. You know, like Roadrunner. Meep, meep. Maybe that's a metaphor for someone talking shit. Who knows? Or, you know, just if they don't, you know, if they just don't make sense or a little odd. Anyway, that's just a fun last name here, pseudonym. Anyway, there's more to come on that. And I want to say just in the recap, a few things struck me. One of the first was in the beginning of the journal entry, I was talking about the way that Stone and I were strategizing what would be happening in 2 years. And I really thought that I would leave the Hollywood Reporter in 2 years because, again, the conventional wisdom in the early aughts was if you are an assistant in Hollywood or at a production company, it wouldn't have to be Hollywood, of course. It could have been anywhere. But generally, you would be an assistant for 2 years, and then you could branch off into publicity or other things. So I thought, you know, I don't want to be in publicity. I want to go back to acting because Nigel's 36 at this time, but I'm 31, about to be 32. He's a few years older than me. So, you know, I thought, you know, in 2 years, I'll be 33. I'll just go right back to acting. But what I didn't know was that I would be at the Hollywood Reporter for 6 more years and I'd get promoted twice. And I just found it to be more fascinating than acting because as an actor, as great as that profession is, a lot of it is waiting and it's very subjective, meaning you're the subject. And so you can be waiting around a long time and not really working or doing anything, even though you want to, and you're auditioning and you're trying and you're doing all these different things for your career. This working at the Hollywood Reporter and being in a newsroom, which is what I'd gone to school for, this was an aerial view, as I've said, of the industry at large. So you knew what was going on everywhere. And the more that you did these events and the more that you did these parties and the more that you did coverage, the more embedded that you got with those people and then became a trusted source or a trusted member of legacy media. So I was an editorial assistant, so I was not a reporter. But if you were an editorial assistant, you could still do events and you could do coverage. And then that came out of the features department, that budget. So if you were cool and you did well on some of these events, not meaning cool, like, hey, he's cool, meaning if you just could handle yourself, then you could get to some of these invites. And then a lot of times people would invite you personally. And of course, you would say coverage doesn't equal access. And so, of course, there's ethics with that, but you would still go. So coverage not equaling access means, okay, I'll come, because it really depends on space. It depends on a lot of things. So that was one of my first entrees into Black Hollywood, and it was really an amazing evening. And like I said, there's more that's coming in part 2. Meeting Earth, Wind, and Fire was also so very incredible. And when I talked about the hustle and hell of LA, I am referring to, it can be a hustle. And when you're hustling and when you're not where you want to be in your career, or you haven't landed yet, which was my first 5 years that I was there. I moved to LA in 1996. So I was an actor, and I was a stage actor, and I was working. So that wasn't the problem. But I was, of course, if you're acting, I loved doing plays, but I also would try to audition and be seen for TV shows, especially for TV series. And this was back when basically TV production was over as of May. That's when everything would go on hiatus so that people who are actually doing series can do other things. They can work on movies or movies of the week or just take a break. And so the industry would just be dead as far as production for the summer. So if you're doing plays, odds are you can't necessarily audition for shows too much, because of course they know that you have a play and you're not going to be able to potentially make it back to your curtain if you're working on a series that's going overtime. So it really was. And then there were times you're just not working at all, even though I always had a day job. But it was a third shift job, but I always had that. So yeah, it was the hustle and the hell. Yes, absolutely. I think anyone can relate to that, especially when you're first starting. But then you look back, and some of it was actually really so simple and fun, because things weren't really as complicated, until you actually have a career that's completely demanding your time 24/7. And the Hollywood Reporter was 24/7. We had bureaus all over the world. News doesn't stop. The news cycles go and go and go. So I found that fascinating, and that's why I ended up staying at the Hollywood Reporter for 6 more years. But the hustle and what feels like hell at the time when you're trying to break through, that was definitely there too. And as far as with Earth, Wind, and Fire, as I said, I had been temping at UCLA the year before. That's actually in season 1 of this podcast where I talked about it. I didn't like that gig too much. And so I just remember thinking like, oh man, if I could just meet Earth, Wind, and Fire. And then I did. So that was kind of the first manifest, where I was like, wow. And of course, if you live in LA for any period of time, you do start actually meeting people that you've seen before or that you know from TV or movies or pop culture. So I that was my first time, like, wow. And Nigel, even though he liked Bo from Earth, Wind, and Fire, he did not disrespect the man's wife, of course. But that's kind of how Nigel rolled. Nigel says a lot of things that are off the chain, as you will hear. And some of that vibe is why we're not friends today. But wherever Nigel is, and I have a feeling I hope he's doing great. That's more to come. It took a while for that. It took a while for that to happen. And actually, in doing this episode, I was like, oh, like I could totally remember how much fun we used to have. He was one of my best friends, and we were friends for a really, really long time. So it was nice to revisit Nigel being hilarious and eating anything, popping off. That was pretty fun. Anyway, there's more to come next week. Thank you for being here. Thank you again for your support, and thank you for sticking with this podcast, because it's something that I built because I wanted to put myself out there and to have a community and be able to talk with you, and it's happening, and I'm grateful all the time. This podcast is growing, and for those of you who've been here from the very beginning, I tell you all the time, I appreciate you, and come back next week. There's more to say, there's more to share, okay? And I hope that you're having a great week wherever you are, and as always, remember, love is real, and I wish you all great things. Thanks so much for being here. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.